presentation. So just a reminder, on page 5 of your agenda, it outlines the process for the next 2 days. So we are going to just start off just recapping what we've done, where we've been, and the discussions that we've had, particularly around the key conversations. I'll do that intro bit, then Una's going to talk about the consultation process. And then following that, we'll have some questions around clarification of the process, and then we'll actually go into the meaty part of the discussion around the key conversations, the feedback, and looking for decisions on each of those. So again, just a reminder about the annual plan process around the changes to the Local Government Act. The fact that the process again is exceptions based, and you will recall as well that this time that the exceptions were there were a couple of significant decisions different from the long-term plan, and we did go out and have a conversation and a consultation with our community on those matters. During the annual plan development, so the starting point itself was always year 3 of the LTP, bearing in mind that that was approved and signed off now nearly 2 years ago, but at the start of this process was only 18 months ago. And the theme of the long-term plan was around financial sustainability and living within our goals and within our means, achieving our goals by living within our means while providing sufficient funding for key projects. Across the 10 years of the LTP, it was always about trying to balance, or was balancing the 3 levers around debt levels, around our levels of service, so what our community actually got, and the rates increases, and trying to balance those evenly. And furthermore, it was around continuing on with the 5 key challenges that the community faced. So funding of council services, around making sure that we were sustainable in the long term. Wastewater, being Rotorua sewage schemes or wastewater treatment plant upgrades, exiting the forest, those types of activities. The waste strategy, so that's around the landfill and the waste collection, which has now been implemented. Maintaining our community infrastructure, so you recall that we weren't really investing at the level we needed to in our community infrastructure, particularly things like reserves, some of our public buildings such as the library, obviously earthquake strengthening of the museum, SHIMPAC and those types of things, and then keeping pace with Rotorua 2030 and its goals. So overall, those were the things that we were looking to maintain and achieve when revising year 3 of the LTP and the development of the annual plan. So the development itself was the operating budgets were based on the current year, the year that we got currently underway. The capital works program was based on originally on the long-term plan of what we had scheduled in there. The LTP had us borrowing 2 years for the next financial year. And we modelled the rating framework changes on what was in the LTP. So that was particularly around changes to the differentials was the only real significant movement in that. And then we reviewed those against our strategic priorities. And that there's just a summary of, of what I talked about. So the key one at the top is, you recall we've done the Vision 2030, the big moves and the big projects, having those workshops talking about what were Rotorua's priorities, where we wanted to go. Around the rating, focusing on differentials, what was the inflation factor, looking at how community boards were funded, the farming remission that was introduced at the time of the long-term plan, also short-term rental accommodation, waste management, we focused on the funding policy, looking at extending the service. The big discussion around wastewater was Rotorua. CCOs, just having a look at the funding levels, effectively holding the funding of 2 of the CCOs and asked the third, which was Destination Rotorua, with regards to what a 5% efficiency saving would look like. And then the levels of service, and particularly the museum post the closure, the real fire service and the changes that are happening there, and our staffing levels in conjunction to, in relation to the pressures around consenting and regulatory and some of the new things that have come in there. Furthermore, there was a significant number of discussions and workshops on Rotorua 2030 and the big moves and the big projects, and out of those came some key projects and some big moves that we felt were significantly important and we needed to accommodate in the annual plan. And particularly, so cornerstone discussion, Rotorua, devolved funding of the community boards with regards to moving them all to the general rate rather than having targeted rates. Sports facility development, and particularly netball, but looking at hockey and soccer and all those sorts of facilities. The Performing Arts Centre, and focusing on entranceways and toilets and signage and boat ramps. And so those are really that amenity value to our community, and making sure that those amenities were at the standard that our community expects, but also our visitors can enjoy as well and expect. And on top of that, while some of these may not have a direct impact on our proposed annual plan, the Eastern Corridor with regards to the roading network, the spatial plan or the future growth plan, affordable housing, the Waka Forest Long Mile Road Recreation Park, so that has had an impact. Well, we have included some funding in for that. Lakefront revitalisation, what can we do to speed up, improve development, and as well as the aquatic centre investment case was seen as big moves. So some of those, as I said, have not impacted on this annual plan, but you will come forward shortly and will probably form cornerstone discussions for the long-term plan, and in particular probably the aquatic centre is one of those, and the lakefront being probably another one as well. But we have got included some level of funding in the annual plan to progress those projects forward. So the consultation document itself, so what was proposed, so the discussion for Rotorua was around does the community want this project to go ahead or not, and if so, do you wish to be rated at the start of the project or at the completion of the project. Conversation 2 around waste management services was extending this service across the district, and particularly capturing some rural communities and providing options to them. Proposing to change the funding policy with regards to moving fully to a targeted rate, and as well as removing the ability to opt out with regards to if a rubbish truck if you're in the serviceable area and the rubbish truck is already going past your house, there was no ability to opt out. And the feeling there was it was probably a better option to pay the rate rather than pay double that to a third party provider, considering the truck was already going past. The museum, the targeted rate there there was a little bit of confusion around this. It was around, obviously, the operating budget of the museum was pulled back by about 1.6 million following the closure, but it still did leave a bit of a shortfall, and was looking at what were the options available to fund that shortfall. Conversation 5, removal of the community board targeted rate. And other conversations, and particularly the farming remission, the proposed 50% reduction in that, with a look of phasing it out, obviously the following year, and around the short-term rental accommodation issues facing the community at the moment as well. So the annual plan by the numbers, or what we were looking to do, an average rate increase of 3.8%, inflation underneath that was 1.5%. So what made up the difference was obviously pressure around the museum, but also increasing the level of the general rate to support those big moves and those big projects, as well as the flow-on effect of managing our debt in the long term. So it did see an increase in our borrowing. In particular, there were 2 significant projects that were on top of that long-term plan, being the transformers for the wastewater treatment plant, as well as obviously the Sir Howard Morrison Performing Arts Centre. And so we had an underlying capital works program of 39.5 million. Now that didn't include Rotorua, which would add another 5 to 6 million on top of that for capital works for year 1, and would also have a further rating impact, but only for the community that would face that targeted rate. Capital works itself, so the big focus, again, following on from the long-term plan, was around making sure that we're providing sufficient funding for renewing the existing asset base that we had. So a significant portion was on that, so 27.1 million of funding was made available to look after our existing infrastructure. That's from roads to water networks to parks infrastructure to buildings, etc. And then improving our level of service as well. So we were looking at increasing our levels of service in certain areas. So the renewals, as you can see, weighted heavily or significantly made up of infrastructure, roads, waters, sewerage, stormwater. Governance is obviously our ERP or our ozone to Tech 1 replacement. Into our community facilities as well. Part of it is the civic centre upgrade, as well as obviously focusing on other community facilities. And the library health hub there as well, which was just finishing off that project. So that's and $3 million with regards to the earthquake strengthening and development of the Sir Howard Morrison Performing Arts Centre. With regards to improving our levels of service, roading and footpaths, and now bearing in mind the majority of that was also funded by NZTA subsidies, so a lot of that was around the cycle networks, water supplies, so that's actually focusing on around Taniwha Springs, around securing and implementing the changes required there to secure the long-term water. Sewage disposal, focusing on the wastewater treatment plant upgrade that's been coming in a city development. And then you'll see there around the bottom the major projects and visions, and so a lot of focus was around Long Mile, so getting some master planning done with regards to Long Mile, the Tukarangi Triangle and the wider Waka Forest, so working with CNI and the underlying landowners with regards to master planning for that area. Reserve planning, lakefront, Sulphur Pointish, those types of areas around, really accelerating that. I think that's one of those projects that the community and we've talked about for some time, so really progressing that forward. The aquatic centre, sports facilities, so finishing off the netball courts, as well as I think the next focus is around the netball courts, as well as a bit of work around some of the soccer fields. City gateways, tourism lake pressures, so toilet blocks, boat ramps, just making sure those amenity are at the level that they're required. The gene pattern park upgrade and more urban cycleways down the bottom. So factors driving the rate increase. So the shortfall in the museum did make up 0.5%. So then therefore the underlying increase was 3.3. So it was above the underlying rate of inflation of 1.5, so 1.8 higher, and the increase there was, as we talked about, was to fund the growth and those critical projects that we talked about, and to reduce our debt over the long term as well. So not trying to fund a lot of that level of service improvement work on debt, but actually looking to fund a portion of that as well on with regards to our revenues. Council borrowing, so as I said, it was up by 3.5 million at the time of the discussion, so mainly required to support two significant projects, but as I said, Rotorua would add on top of that as well. So that 9 million would be over 2 years, so as I said before, about half of that each year, 4.5 million each year over the next 2 years. Skip to that slide. So just a reminder as well as while, as I talked about the level of rates being higher than the rate of inflation around helping fund growth and fund those projects, is that if I just bring you back to this graph again. So the blue bars are our actual debt to date, well, to the end of where we're forecasting to be 2017. The red line that moves up and down at the top is our debt limit. And you'll see that it has changed over the time, and that's a reminder that our debt limit is linked to our revenues. The orange line, so just for those this way, this one here, oh, nice steady hand, and the councillors over there, that line there, very steady hand. That was where our debt was projected to be as per our long-term plan, and now the new purple line is where we're now projecting to be. So that captures obviously the savings of the previous 2 years, whereby we planned to borrow but instead we reduced debt. On top of that as well as so the proposed rate increase and lifting the level of funding to support some of those projects also has the flow-on effect of reducing our borrowings over the remainder of the long-term plan as well. And so just showing you the stark contrast here between where the LTP had us and now where we are looking to go with regards to our debt into the long term. And in particular, looking to reduce it a lot lower. So with that, I'll just hand over to Una with regards to the consultation.
Good morning, councillors. So the consultation period ran over about a 5-week period from the 10th of April to the 12th of May. We've had really good response, I think, to this year's annual plan being run as a special consultative procedure. We received 295 submissions, and those submissions mainly did focus on those 5 key conversations that you went out with in your consultation document. Our submissions were received via a number of different ways, mainly our new Let's Talk, but equally through email and traditional mail. During the period, there was also a number of community workshops that were run, so some quite targeted, specific engagement with affected communities, and they were based mainly around the introduction of extending waste services out into rural communities and the Rotorua community, and this also included a phone survey that was done targeting each of the households in that community. So just looking at how we're going to approach the next 2 days and how we're going to work through those 295 submissions. We have worked on a program to split the 2 days. The first day being today, we'll review each of those key conversations in turn. We'll look at what was proposed and then we will look at the overall feedback received. At the end of the discussion on each conversation, there will be the opportunity for council to make its decision on where it wants to, what direction it wants to go in terms of that conversation. At the end of each of those 5 conversations, that means there is a definitive position on what will end up in our final annual plan. Each group manager is going to lead those key conversations. And then at the end of those conversations, we will adjourn the day. Starting off tomorrow, we will then address all of the other submissions. Now, what we've done here is we've taken those submissions that didn't directly talk to our 5 key conversations, and we've grouped them into different themes, which are included in your agenda. So during tomorrow's session, we'll go through each one of those submissions and review them with a look to making a recommendation. And then at the end of Wednesday's session, we'll have a summary which will provide a recap on the decisions that have been made and how that will then position ourselves for a final annual plan. So I think I've pretty much sort of covered this off anyway. So we, based on what comes out of your decisions made here today and tomorrow, we will work on finalising an annual plan, which you will then adopt on the 29th of, I've put the wrong date up there. That'll be June. And following that, submitters will be written to and notified of the outcomes of their submissions. Right, so at this point, we're just going to pause on that, and we're happy to take any questions for clarification on those slides.
So, Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, can you just clarify for me, in the consultation document, the graph on debt has a legend airport debt, which wasn't on the graph that you've just shown. And I would like to understand exactly where the airport debt comes into this picture and how much is actually allowed for in the annual plan. Thank you.
So, Councillor, good question. Look, as you can see on that legend as well, there is a little green box there, and that did have airport debt showing separately. However, and you'll recall on the LTP, we actually showed the airport debt separately on top of the existing bars. We've just included it all in. So this is the total debt picture of council and the wider CCO family. So it is including in there. So I think the error on our behalf was around when we printed the document. I did find out that that legend should have been removed, but it just didn't get it removed in time, and unfortunately went out in the way that it did. But all I can reassure you is that this is the total complete debt picture for council and its CCOs.
Thank you, Councillor Kent. Councillor Tapsell, you had a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Thomas. Just a question on this, and apologies if this is something more for the long-term plan, but I just realised we haven't really had this conversation. With the AP debt, what is actually the presumed growth rate for Rotorua? Has that been accounted for when you're doing this financial modelling? Just because the previous growth rate has increased quite significantly.
Yeah, another good question. So at the time of the LTP, we did have a growth assumption at the time, and it was an extremely conservative one. I think it's fair to say coming into the next long-term plan, which we're about probably to start in 1 month's time, that we will have a much different growth figure to take into account that may, obviously impact this as well.
Thomas, Councillor Gould, is your question on this slide? So if I could ask you to just hold, I've got a question on this slide. Thomas, the revenue line that's projected on conservative growth, that represents the revenue that we have a policy of keeping our debt at 175% of that, is that correct? And that revenue incorporates the revenue from both council and its CCAs?
Correct, it's capped at 175. It doesn't include the revenue from the CCOs, so it's just the parent organisation. But obviously rates revenue and all other revenue streams, including capital subsidies that may come in for projects. Hence why you can see sometimes it does jump up and then drops back down, because there's a revenue stream with regards to, say, Rotorua, that does attract government from the Ministry of the Environment as well as from Regional Council. The line will jump up and then the following year it will reduce back, because clearly those were one-off revenues.
So just to be clear, following on from Councillor Kent's question, the revenue doesn't include the revenue from the likes of the airport, but it does include, the graph includes the debt from the airport.
Correct, because we hold all that pretty much debt now, because the airport, all the debt now is 15 million, and we have held that on behalf and on lent it to the airport, and that is reflected in these numbers. Yep.
Thank you. Councillor Gould.
Chairman, when you mentioned in one of your previous slides, sewage scheme add 9 million to the Rotorua sewage project over a period of 2 years, have you taken that into account, or is that going to change your figures dramatically by taking those figures into account over a certain period of time when the project starts, or is it delayed?
We do take it into account, but just might need to clarify which part you're meaning to, with regards to the debt or with regards to, what do you mean there, Councillor?
When you mentioned the capital works projects of 39.5 million, and on your figures you said the average of the renewals is 27.1 and improving is 12.5, which comes to 39.6 million. Is that in that part, or is that in you said it was additional parts?
Yeah,
so it means
so yeah, Rotorua is on top of those figures, so on top of that.
One, the inner city services, 1,173,000. In one of your graphs you mentioned that figure. Is that from the project being started now with payment in the 1 July year, or is that payment part of it payment in the up until the 30th of June year?
Not sure this is a question of clarification. We might be getting into some detail here, but just rest assured, I guess from an accounting perspective, the numbers that we talk about are costs that fall due in the year that's applicable, regardless of when they actually physically get paid. Yeah.
Jim? In the Jean Batten Park upgrade of $200,000, I thought that was included in the library upgrade, which is being completed at the moment by Fletcher Challenge. Is that a totally separate...
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, that has been completely separate, and we have told you that through this process that the money for the library and health hub was the money for the library and health hub building.
Councillor Kent, did you have a further question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a follow-on really on the airport issue. So if airport revenue is not included in these figures, is the airport upgrade included in our capital spend figures or not?
No, it's not, because that capital spend sits on their books. However, it is help funded by council, because you recall that council does provide $4 million per annum of funding to the airport, and that is how the airport is able to afford with regards to helping fund its operations as well as funding the infrastructure. So there is no impact on our finances with regards to what the airport is proposing to do, because at the time of, might be a good time to clarify this. So at the time when we set the level of funding at the long-term plan, the airport company developed a 20-year forecast with regards to its financials, and in particular because it's a significant infrastructure. It has implications with regards to the renewal of the underlying asset, as well as the earthquake strengthening was required. So they programmed that all out, and our level of funding is set at such a level that they are able to do those things consistently over the long term. Now, it may mean that in some year they're sitting on a little bit more cash than desired, and in other years they may use a little bit more, because as you can understand, it goes up and down. But the key was making sure that the level of funding from council remained consistent over that period, because it's very hard for us to all of a sudden ask the community to lift it up for when some of these significant projects do come about. On top of that, the 20-year forecast of the airport has them significantly reducing that debt. So you recall we moved $18.4 million worth of debt along with the asset. So they've already retired 3.4 of that, and so there's 15 million left, which we currently hold on their behalf. So they're able to fund the upgrade and earthquake strengthening of the terminal and the fire station, etc., and then reduce their debt over the short period or the medium term as well.
Thank you, but I still don't quite understand if the airport upgrade is being funded, as I understand it, by delaying the paying back of debt to council. Surely that airport upgrade is impacting on this council's cash flow.
No, Councillor, I never said that they were delaying the repayment. What I'm saying is that this forecast, this debt projection already has this built in. So we know when the airport will borrow, and we know when they will repay back based on their capital program, and that debt profile is reflected in this.
But I understood the funding of the airport upgrade was coming from this council delaying the repayment of debt to this council.
I'm not too sure where you've got that from, Councillor.
All right. If there are no further questions, I'll call for a mover and a seconder of the following motion, and I'll read it. That the report decisions following consideration of submissions to Council's annual plan consultation document 2017-2018 be received. That the Council receives the minutes of the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee annual plan hearings held 23rd and 24th of May 2017. And thirdly, that the Council consider and determine on all submissions to Council's annual plan consultation document 27-2018, following which any amendments be incorporated into the annual plan 2017-2018 for adoption at the Council meeting on the 29th of June 2017. So Councillor Gould, seconded Councillor Maxwell. Does anyone want to speak to that? I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. So we move on now to conversation 1, which is the East Rotorua Sewerage Scheme. It's on page 85 of the agenda. And I ask Stavros Michael to overview the item.
Good morning, councillors. I will go through a brief summary of the conversation 1, and at the end we can have any questions the councillors may wish to present. The Rotorua switch scheme is part and parcel of this council's overall efforts in conjunction with the Te Aroha Lakes Water Quality program over the years, which also tracks partnering by the Ministry for the Environment, Ministry of Health and the Regional Council to gradually take actions to improve the quality of water in our lakes. Again, specifically with the Rotorua and Rotorua schemes, as most of you are aware, this is a long-term process. A few years back, an effort to introduce a wastewater reticulation scheme in those, two lakes encountered some significant legal challenges within Environment Court. It was postponed, and about 3.5 years ago, it restarted again, and it has been led by a community-led steering group, which slowly navigated through a whole range of issues, exploring options, a long list of options, which finally was distilled down to a short list of options. And those options finally came to a fruition with a recommendation back in late last year, which led to a resource consent application to move on with a sewage reticulation and treatment scheme, linking Rotorua and Rotorua, anticipating a grinder pump option for Rotorua, and a treatment plant in Rotorua, and biolytics or something similar for the lake Rotorua community. Upon lodging the application, the resource consent application, some objections were received by the owners of the land that it was intended to house a treatment plant, and the objection was based around the transmission of untreated sewage from Rotorua through their land towards the treatment plant. The resource consent application was put on hold for a while until efforts were put underway to discuss with the objectors, various options and alternative solutions, to their concerns. So between November and late February, early March this year, extensive discussions took place with objectors, which led to two significant community meetings on Easter Monday, where the communities of Rotorua and Rotorua were asked to consider the option of introducing a system for the partial treatment of sewage from Lake Rotorua, or risk the objection being sustained, and therefore the scheme not being able to proceed through the RMA processes. Both communities, although with some reservations, but in the interest of the scheme proceeding, have accepted that Rotorua could consider an alternative to grinder pumps into a partially treatment system, what we call a step system. And on that basis, now both Rotorua and Rotorua communities will have their wastewater partially treated before it's pumped through the landowner's property and to the treatment plant. Now, in conjunction with that, with these processes, the question was posed to the community as to whether they would, first of all, they want the scheme to proceed, and secondly, whether that cost of those of the scheme, the capital costs, should start being implemented and repaid in 1718, and a contribution to the wastewater targeted levy for the operations of the district sewage schemes should also start in 1718. The feedback, and you can see the numbers in that report, overwhelmingly suggests that there is wide support for the scheme. There is, however, resistance, and questioning of the need to start charging for the capital levy as from 1718, since the scheme would not be completed until the end of 1718, and the operational levy to commence in 1819 once the Rotorua and the treatment plant are in place. The parameters of the scheme are also explained into the paper, which basically anticipate the construction of a completely reticulated scheme at a cost of roughly about $35 million, out of which about $25 million are subsidized or funding provided by the Ministry of Health, Bay of Plenty Regional Council, the Ministry for the Environment. The residual $9.8 million is a capital that we borrowed by this council and gradually levied by each individual participating properties. So also in parallel with this exploration of issues and the reasons for the project, were also made clear to the community again. I want to sort of remind again for all of us is that in the absence of a reticulation scheme in Lake Rotoiti and Rotorua, the regional council's OSED rules require each property to establish what an on-site sewage effluent treatment, which is a little bit more expensive than the aggregate net cost to each individual property from a reticulation system. However, the problem is that some properties cannot install OSET because they don't have the space or the location capability to do so, and therefore a community-based reticulation system seems to be the most cost-effective and appropriate action at this point in time. And on top of that, also we've got the issue of the potential risks that if we don't proceed with the reticulation system right now, we have the Ministry of Health time requirements, which places about $4.5 million of that funding at risk. That funding has been extended to council, I understand, in earlier years and has been extended over at least 3 times to date. And the Ministry of Health has made it very clear that unless the scheme is completed or substantially completed for Rotorua by June 2018, then they're highly unlikely to continue to extend, that $4.5 million funding, which means that if we don't do it, we will have to find this, source of funding from alternative sources. Now, another issue that I wanted to discuss with you today is the fact that in the whole of the process, and again this is not something new, the community of Lake Rotoehu have always argued and they would like to be part of that reticulation scheme. Now, there are historical arguments as to why they have not been included from the beginning, but nevertheless, in moving forward, I think our recommendations is embedded into recommendation 5, is that this council signals this commitment to a wastewater management infrastructure as a core service, for the district where that is possible, and to that extent, signals its support for reticulation system for all the communities of Rotoehu, including Kennedy on Otatu Base, and of course that will be subject to securing the alternative, the required funding for those kind of schemes. So in summary, our recommendations, and bearing in mind that the history and the time requirements and time limitations of this kind of projects posed by the Ministry of Health's deadlines, is to accept that the work of the steering group, and the phone survey has provided this council with a solid view that the community is supportive of the scheme for Rotoiti and Rotorua. Also to support the steering group's recommendation that the step system for Rotorua and biolytics or equivalent for Rotoiti, subject to successful trial, are being installed. Also recognizing the feedback we had from the community, to pause on the introduction of the capital contribution until the schemes have been commissioned. And 4th, to note that as a result of commencing this project, a district-wide increase to the PAN charge will be required for the 2018-19. The principle of that is that the operational costs of all wastewater treatment processes in the district are funded by all those properties who receive a wastewater service, and that it makes it a bit more equal and even in distribution. Happy to take any questions, councillors. Thank you.
Thank you, Stavros. And before we get into questioning councillors, can I just ask for the first part that we restrict our questions to parts 1 to 4 of the recommendation. So in relation to the Rotorua, East Rotorua, Rotorua sewage scheme, and then we'll consider that, and then we'll go into questions regarding Rotorua. So do I have any questions of Stavros? Councillor Rokawate.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's in relation to not Rotorua, the other bay, Okahu, Otato and Kennedy Bay. And what we're hoping that at some stage in the future they'll be joined up. Have you got an approximate time? I know it's dependent on funding, but are the folks out there going to be waiting 10 years, or can we give them some indication of a timeline there?
So, sorry, Councillor Rokawate, that's the second part. So if we can just restrict questions in the first part to the discussion document, so Rotorua and East Rotorua, and then we'll go on to questions for Otato Bay and Kennedy Bay once we've considered those questions, if you don't mind holding that question.
I think it's a bit disjointed because we've just had that in the presentation, but nevertheless I'll concur.
Councillor Gould. And
With number 4, what's the cost of the pan charge increase for 2018-19, Stavros?
I think it's $37 per property. $37.
And my other question is on number 2, the biofix for Rotorua, servicing is required every 9 months. Is that servicing part of the council paying for, or is that part of the landowner paying for?
Rotorua will have a step system, not biolytics. Servicing, emptying the tank is estimated to be required every 7 to 8 years, and that is going to be part and parcel of the overall operational cost, of the project to be paid by the, targeted levy.
I've got Councillor Maxwell and Councillor Bentley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Stavros. Just a couple of quick questions. So, having listened to all the hearings and that, my first question's on question 2. That's page 80. And the one chaired by the steering group that's chaired by, what's his name?
Ian McLean.
Ian McLean. So their steering committee have supported the step system and biolytics if it's successful with the trials. Can I ask, does that jeopardise any, because they're waiting for the trial to happen, are they still within the time frame to ensure that they will not jeopardise any of the subsidies that are coming from Ministry of Health, Bioplenty and Ministry of Environment?
Councillors, the Ministry of Health subsidy of $4.5 million, it's applicable to Lake Rotorua. Lake Rotorua will have a step system and is not subject to any trial. That step system, provided we get the results concerned in the hearings in mid-July, we will start immediately the procurement process in order to start constructing the Rotorua and the treatment plant throughout the 17-18 financial year. The trial of the biolytics units is taking place at the moment, is due to be completed by March 2018. However, the fortunate issue with us is that the Lake Rotorua funding is not subject to any deadlines. And, the only consideration would be that, is our biolytics working effectively to address what we want to achieve, or if they don't, what is the fallback position, which is likely to be a step system for Rotorua 82.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bentley.
Thank you, Mr.
Followed
Chair.
by Councillor O'Coa-Tate, Councillor Tapsell and Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Stavros, thanks for your presentation this morning. And I'm not sure if I'm jumping ahead or not, but have you or your team given any consideration to the operation of a treatment plant, or the actual construction of the treatment plant out at Rotorua being a public-private facility? Would you consider investigating that, given that some people have an awful lot of money to invest if they wish?
Thank you, Councillor Bedley. I will address it in two levels. One is that our executive team is currently, considering, as part and parcel of our future, procurement strategy, various options, which includes public, private, partnerships. However, with regards to the treatment plan in Rotorua and the Rotorua system, because of the time constraints we've got with the Ministry of Health, we haven't got the time to go through appropriate procurement processes at the moment. However, that does not preclude that plan to be negotiated in a future timeline to a third entity or a public, private entity to operate that plant, or even invest into that plant for an exchange of fee or an annual fee. However, in a nutshell, the answer to your question is that yes, the timing might require us to wait for another couple of years.
Councillor O'Coa-Tate, your question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. It is on one of the questions between 1 to 4, so it relates to that. Thank you. It's really around, I'm aware that the steering group, the work and the effort that the steering group's put in, Stavros, over a number of years to try and get us over the line on this one. So I thank them for their efforts. But it is around the Ministry of Health's subsidy. I presume that they have been kept informed that we are working towards to get a solution to this, because sometimes I feel a little uncomfortable when we're often referring to the Ministry of Health's subsidy and get your skates on, or it's going to be withdrawn, I want to know, have they been kept informed that we're working towards getting to a solution that's agreeable for all parties? Because surely they wouldn't just pull the plug on us, knowing that we've been doing all of this work. Thank you.
Yes, the Ministry of Health has been constantly been updated about progress, to the project. Their words to the effect is that the funding is available provided the project is completed by June 2018. However, in discussions with them, the word is substantially completed by 2018. Again, the Ministry of Health has expressed in a number of occasions their frustrations is that that funding has been made available to this community for the last 3 to 5 years, as I understand, and they said, look, there are other communities who might want take advantage of that reserves. If you can't move on, then perhaps these other communities more ready to take it over. So I think, subject to the resource consent in July, we have a high level of confidence that we'll be able to deliver the requirements of the Ministry of Health.
Thank you, Councillor Tapsell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Stavros. I'm delighted to actually see this finally come here. I know after 4 years of working through this, the steering group and the community are eagerly waiting for this. I also had a question on the subsidies. I know the Ministry of Health is only one of 3 of 24.7 million in external funding that will go towards this. Are there any any concerns from the other 2 that are alongside the Ministry of Health, as in are they also expecting us to put this through quite promptly, otherwise that external funding may go?
Councillor Thompson, no, we don't have any time limitations for the Ministry of the Environment or the Regional Council, and because the funding allocated for the lakes water quality is a generic funding and has been dedicated to this area, and therefore timeframes are not really the same issue as the Ministry of Health.
Thank you. Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Stavros, I have major concerns over this, and my main concern comes about the actual cost that's involved. We're looking at something like 35.2 million in total before the subsidies. to actually provide facilities to, I believe, 770 households, which is $45,700 per household, more than double the cost of any OSET system. And we have a scenario here where biolytics trial is underway, and where biolytics, actually the cost of the pods from some of the submissions is only about $7,500. I understand the necessity to have treated waste coming from the units collected and transported, and I believe that if you took the system of biolytics and did a reticulated system from there, you would not need remotely such a comprehensive MBR plant.
Is that a question?
My question is, I asked at the last session for some information as to what the cost would be for a reticulated system using biolytics and a reduced plant, and I don't see it. So can we have those figures, please?
The question number one, the cost of a reticulated system using biolytics is $34.5 million as stated in this report. I think the difference between the pod costs and the overall costs is that we have a reticulation system to be added to the pod's costs. Third, the argument has been made, and in some of the submissions too, is that if we use biolytics everywhere, the level of treatment, the quality of treatment is high enough not to require an MBR process or a waste treatment plant. The answer to that is that the biolytics does not, the performance characteristics of the biolytic system does not meet the requirements for nutrient discharges. And just to give you a quick indication without wanting to delve into significant or technical aspects, a biolytics performance characteristic in terms of nitrogen is about 37-38 milligrams per liter. The requirements for resource concern, and in terms of our Rotorua Lakes water quality, it's a target to meet a nitrogen discharge of between 3 and 5 milligrams per liter. So therefore, the biolytics by themselves cannot meet those resource concern conditions requirements, and an MBR process is required to further treat the effluent before it's discharged into the land. Again, as I said, it is high costs for 770 properties. However, the community has been into a significant consultation over a number of years. The Ministry of the Environment, the Ministry of Health, and the Regional Council recognize there are significant environmental benefits to be derived for that, and they are supporting it to the tune of $25 million, and we are where we are at the moment, ready to proceed with the scheme.
Then just to clarify, you were saying that even if you had a reticulated system with biolytics units, you would still need the MBR plant and the cost would still be the same, or would we have a reduced cost of the MBR plant?
I'm saying that, all the advice we have, the technical, design processes is that an MBR is required to bring the nutrients characteristic to the level that we meet in the resource concerns of 3 to 5 milligrams per liter.
So there is no cost reduction by going the biolytics way with a lesser plant?
No, I don't believe so.
Thank you.
So I had a further question from Councillor Bentley, followed by Councillor Hunt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Stavros, with regard to this upcoming Environmental Court hearing, are you anticipating any hiccups?
As I said earlier, we had objections raised by the landowners of the land where the treatment plant will be sited. Their objection was based on the transmission of untreated sewage to their land. We have spent a considerable amount of time with them to address their concerns. We believe the Rotorua community's acceptance of a step system addresses, their concerns, and we are in the process at the moment of discussing with them a signed withdrawal of their objection. To the best of my knowledge, I don't anticipate, any dramas after that. But as I said, having said that, going to a resource concern hearing, things might come that we're not aware of at the moment. But we believe all the issues we are aware of are manageable issues.
Councillor Hunt.
Thank you. Mine's really on getting it built. In the past, we've had Castle Corp, now Infracore, having the capacity to build systems like this with the low-pressure grinder pump. Is this going to be something that they do, or are we going out, will it be part of just an open tender process? And I guess my question is, we have lots of these systems around our lakes, and keeping that knowledge in-house has been extremely valuable.
For Rotorua and Rotorua, there will be no grinder pumps.
Okay, but putting in
the reticulation system and the installation of a step system and biolytics, if biolytics is successful, it will be procured, through specialist companies, and who will provide us the required warranties, and assurances and guarantees that the system will work.
And just to add to that, Councillor Hunt, Infracore or Castle Corp built the first system at Hennemore Point, which proved invaluable in terms of those staff servicing the LPGP schemes that have been delivered, but more recent schemes were delivered, I believe, by Downers. Is that correct? Yep. Councillor Sturt, do you have a question?
Mr. Chairman, apologies for lateness. I just want to ask Devros, with the inclusion of the step system, in the notes it says this will add another 0.8 million to the capital cost estimate. This would mean the total project will cost 35.3. Do the subsidies go up commensurate with that inclusion? Because I'm trying to get, like Councillor Kent, I'm trying to get a handle on the actual cost after subsidy. And is there an opportunity to approach Ministry of Health on hardship grounds to actually increase their subsidy? Because I know there are people out there, many can afford it, but there are many who cannot afford $1,080 per annum for 25 years.
The subsidies for the Ministry of the Environment and the Regional Council are pro rata to the overall cost of the scheme. The Ministry of Health's funding is ring-fenced at $4.46 million, and understand a number of approaches have been made to the Ministry of Health over the years, and the answer is that build it or you lose it.
And can I add to that answer, Councillor Sturt? So the Regional Council provided an additional subsidy of $4 million to equalise the costs per household unit across the two schemes. And at the two Easter meetings, one held at Rotorua and one held in Rotorua, it was made clear to the community when they were considering the step option that it came with an extra cost per household of approximately $1,100 capital cost, and that there would be no additional subsidy if that's how they voted, and overwhelmingly they voted for the step system.
The question I've got is that when we've established historically sewage treatment schemes, there's been a subsidy from the general ratepayer of $1,500 per section. I don't see that in the equation. Has that been waived, or where are we heading with that?
Now, the net cost to the local ratepayers takes into account this council's $1,500 rate, subsidy. So the residual, the remaining funding of $9.8 million takes into account that this council, the general ratepayer subsidizes each ratepayer, provides a subsidy of $1,500.
Mr. Chairman, there is, as per the report, there is strong indication of support to implement the step system for Rotorua. However, the concern I have is that I want to know the input of the Rotorua 2B block, does this cost fall on the leaseholder or the leasee in their lease? And is iwi paying up front the capital cost or not? And then the annual servicing charge going on the leasee. I mean, this is really important because there's a lot of single title properties out there, but there are a lot of leasehold properties as well.
Yeah, so I can answer that because it's been broached in many of the public meetings out there, is that in the case of pretty much all the leases, the leasee is paying the cost, the capital cost, and the operational cost. So
on that, Mr. Chairman, I think it's important that we make progress. I would have preferred to have seen Kennedy Bay and Otautu Bay included, but I see under 5 there is that provision made pretty clear.
yeah, so we're only dealing with parts 1 to 4 of the recommendation before you come in, Councillor Sturt.
Sorry.
And we'll get on to questions around those two bays of Lake Rotorua.
To make progress, I'm happy to move 1 to 4.
So thank you. I'll read them out for the benefit of those watching online. That Council agree to accept the work of the steering group and the phone survey has provided a view that the community is in support of the scheme for Rotoiti Rotorua. 2, that Council supports the steering group's preferred option for a step system at Rotorua and biolytics or equivalent for Rotoiti, subject to a successful trial, with both communities connecting to a common membrane bioreactor plant and land disposal system. 3, that there is a pause on the introduction of the capital contribution until the schemes have been commissioned. For Rotorua, this will be 2018-2019. For Rotoiti, this will be 2019-2020. And 4, that Council notes as a result of commencing this project, a district-wide increase to the PAN charge will be required from the 2018-29 year. So that's moved by Councillor Sturt, seconded by Councillor Maxwell. Is there any discussion? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Carried. That's carried. Now, Councillor Kumar, did you have a question in relation to Otautu and Kennedy Bays?
I think so. Excuse my lack of knowledge in this area, but we had a very emotional Miss Mohi last week, and she touched a lot of people with what she had to say. So my concern is that while we always get pressure whenever, like Mayor Pekka said, that we put our skates on when devolved funding is involved, how are we going to appease to the ones that have come and cried out to us that they just cannot sustain any more cost, even though they want to sort of go ahead with this? Because I think it does affect a lot of people. That's my concern, because when I saw her last week, my heart sort of went out to her, and just hope we have a solution for those people.
Stavros, would you like to address that? I know that the same lady spoke at both of the public meetings at Easter.
Councillor, as I said earlier, the issue of those two communities in Rotorua who has been canvassed for a number of years, and I think sort of it's non-constructive at this point in time to go through that history. What I would like to assure this council is that we have had meetings with the representatives of those communities, and that led to the recommendation you see in front of you there too. The issue is that this council should and is supportive of a reticulated scheme in that area, and because it makes operational, environmental, and amenity sense for all the communities. However, we do have the historical issue where the funding allocated for Rotoiti and Rotorua right now does not include those two communities. There is a procedure to go through to secure the right funding. The current estimate for those two communities to complete a reticulation system with possibly a step system or something similar to that. It sits around the area of $3.7 to $4 million. So we really require a funding of about $1.7 to $2 million external funding to support that, to make it consistent with Rotorua. By Council expressing their unequivocal support for a reticulated system, it will lead us to go to the Tiarua Lakes Water Quality Group and note the switch as an action point for those two lakes, for those two communities, and start the exploration of funding options for those two communities. There are two possible angles to that. One is that we may find some funding within the contingencies of the Rotoiti Roma scheme and then proceed to install the Rotoihu schemes, or we may ask the regional council and the Ministry of the Environment to provide that require additional funding. In time frames, as a question been asked before, Rotorua and the treatment plant should finish in 17-18, Rotoiti in 18-19, and provided the funding is secured from other sources, Rotoihu communities should see their scheme proceeding in 1920. So in 3 years' time from today.
And Councillor Kumar, can I help? Because I did notice your hand sort of slightly jump up. So the lady you're referring to is actually a resident of Lake Rotorua. She's affected by the decision we've just made. And she came aware of the project at a relatively late stage, but she was there for the two public meetings at Easter. I'd have to say that this has been one of the most widely and rigorously consulted schemes that we've put through in terms of lakeside wastewater reticulation. And in fact, Council has taken some degree of flack for the way that it has consulted, with Council's key concern being affordability. So that's been front and centre for I know our Chief Executive and CFO. And the message that continually comes back is, please just get on and build it, because we need this lakeside reticulation. And that comes from representatives of the iwi as well as other residents in the scheme area. So fair to answer that question, but we have moved on now. So are there any other questions for in relation to the inclusion of in the LTP for Otautu Bay and Kennedy Bay? Councillor Gould.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've had people come up to me and say, well, 20, 30 years ago, people from this area supported the sewage scheme for Rotorua. Why aren't the Rotorua Lakes Council supporting them now in helping them build the system at a more realistic price?
We are working with all the relevant communities, to assist in that direction.
Can I ask a question which may assist with clarification, Stavros? And I looked at it over the weekend. So under the offset rule, if it sets the reticulation zones for the lakeside communities, and the reticulation zone for Lake Rotorua includes the Manawahei Road, where the school is situated, the State Highway and Moruhu Road. They are included in the Rotorua reticulation zone. Otautu Bay and Kennedy Bay are in a future reticulation zone under the offset rule, which is Lake Rotorua. So at this stage, the subsidy proposed by Regional Council is only for the Rotorua and the East Rotoiti reticulation zones, not that. So that would require a change to their offset rule, their LTP, and their annual plan to include those communities in the subsidy at this stage. Am I correct there?
Yes, Mr. Chair, you are correct. And as I said earlier, there are significant sort of historical, discussions and information about that. The bottom line is that we are progressing in that direction at the moment, but your statement is correct.
So moved Councillor Hunt, seconded Councillor Bentley, that Council signal its commitment to wastewater management infrastructure as a core service for the district and therefore supports a full wastewater reticulation and treatment scheme serving all the communities of Lake Rotorua, including Kennedy and Otautu Bays, subject to securing the required funding for such a scheme. Is there any discussion on that? Councillor.
Sure. Mr. Chair, I support the sentiment of that, but like others around, and certainly some of the submissions as to why can't they be included now. I mean, Councillor Gould is quite correct. It wasn't 30 years ago, I mean, it was less than 10 years ago, that the whole reticulation of Kennedy Bay, Otautu Bay and Rotorua was one scheme. The Rotorua thing was a separate issue altogether and wasn't on the table. And at that stage, there was general acceptance. Then Environment Bay of Plenty got on into the party and talked about OSET and created considerable confusion amongst the Kennedy Bay and Otautu Bay people. So they went lukewarm on a reticulated scheme because they felt the grinder pump system, etc., would service their needs. And if we pass that recommendation, their option to go to a grinder pump system is restricted. I mean, we could amend it later on. It's only as good as 6 weeks, I know that. But my concern is we certainly got a strong indication from the the Kennedy Bay and Otautu Bay people that they wanted to be part of it. And what worries me now is that Environment Bay of Plenty will change the rules on them and enforce them into OSET. And at OSET, you're looking at $25,000 to $30,000 a property. And I mean, it's not as though these properties are all in a condensed area, and that's why, hence the cost that you've signalled, Stavros, in terms of just doing the scheme alone. What I'm really scared about, and I want to put it on the record, is that these people will be left in the lurch, that there will be no health subsidy, there will be no Environment Bay of Plenty, and the pressure will come on them to go to OSET. And that I see as unfortunate. Unless I can be assured otherwise, I won't be supporting 5.
I think there are a number of current constraints that we need to be very clear about it. One is that the resource consent application is in place for Rotorua and Rotorua. The resource consent application states that Rotorua will join into that scheme at a later stage. So therefore, the treatment plan in its capacities, will be designed to accommodate that. However, if we, in this point in time, in the 11th hour, go back and say we will include those 2 communities into the scheme, that will require further consultation with Rotorua and Rotorua, which will push our time frames way beyond the Ministry of Health deadlines. At the same time, too, it is quite important for us to make sure that the Regional Council's action statement includes switch for those 2 communities in Rotorua in order to be able to unlock funding subsidy for the scheme, because the Regional Council invested money in land management for those areas, and they need to change a way of thinking.
In response to that reply, the thing I gleaned out of Stavros's reply was there is capacity inbuilt into the scheme that's proposed, therefore that's more likely to happen than just being left out on alert. So I'm more than happy now to, based on that information, to support 5, because it doesn't leave the Kennedy Bay and the Otautu Bay people out on a limb. And it's, I mean, why are we putting these schemes in? We're putting in these schemes in to improve lake water quality. Rotorua has a strong history of poor lake water quality. We don't want Rotorua to deteriorate any further, and hence that's why I moved 1 to 4. But I just put that on the record that I support the people at Kennedy Bay and Otautu Bay to be able to hook on. Stavros has assured me there is capacity for that to occur, and I think get the scheme up and running, and let's look at the options for Otautu and Kennedy Bay. Let's not leave them in the lurch, so that at the LTP we can give a strong signal to those people out there that this council is supporting them and looking to develop a scheme so that they can hook on.
Thank you, Councillor Sturt. So with the mover and the seconder and you now in support, given the explanation, is there anyone that wishes to speak against the motion? In that case, I'll put the motion that, I think I've read it already. Moved Councillor Hunt, seconded Councillor Bentley. All those in favour? Against? Carried. So councillors, sorry.
Just perhaps could we have a few minutes break now?
Okay, I'll take a 5-minute adjournment for a cup of tea and a Thank you, councillors. If we could resume and prepare for conversation number 2, waste management services. And can I ask Stavros and welcome Tim to overview this item for us?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councillors, if I take a minute to recast out the context of this work, please. If you recall, around about March last year, the council has agreed to move into a new waste management system through a collection system, the management of the landfill. Subsequent to that, the new collection system was implemented in November last year. And in December last year, our new waste management strategy has been agreed by the council in mid-December. Out of all that context, we had a significant set of objectives, and one was obviously to improve our level of, service, to all properties in the district. Also to improve the amount of recovered materials from the waste stream, and to continue to provide, education services to minimize adverse environmental effects, in this area. There are a number of areas that still outstanding. Are still outstanding in terms of concluding our comprehensive coverage for the district. And with regards to this consultation, there were 2 particular areas. One were areas in the rural sector, where at the moment they are not serviced at all. What happens, those communities either bury or burn their waste, or some of them buy the bags and they drop them at at our landfill or at the transfer station, the recycling centres. And also we've got a number of properties inside the serviceable areas that, for historical reasons, they have opted out of paying the targeted rates. So the consultation in the annual plan aimed to address 3 things. One was to ask the question, what is the best way to fund the general waste activity? And during the workshops in February, we concluded that the activity should be fully funded through the targeted levy in the near future. So it will be transparency and accountability and more and a more clear direction for the future when we want to add more services. We also explore the possibility of extending the service into the rural areas who currently don't receive the service, and we said we're going to go start with the property with those with those communities, and also we said we will explore the possibility of removing the opt-out option from the serviced areas for those people who historically said they didn't want to be part of the service. So those processes have taken place, and team with me here and together with the assistance of the Rural Community Board would have been extremely valuable in that process. We've talked to with the rural communities, and the feedback from those consultations and discussions are embedded into this conversation which you have in front of you. The net effect of the consultation is that the majority of the rural communities, they really are keen to join the service, but they want to have a more tailored options presented to them and cost structures, which we did not have enough time to conclude by the end of this consultation period. They were not prepared to join a targeted levy system for without having gone through these detailed options, and therefore our recommendations on this paper are influenced by the fact that we recommend not to extend the recycling and refuse collection services in unserviced areas for the next financial year, but to continue to work with those communities, during the next 6 months or so, to tailor some services for them that they feel are reasonable and realistic for their particular circumstances, and having again this conversation as part of the LTP process, which commences early in 2018. Again, because those communities will not participate into the into the overall service, we would make the application of fully targeted levy 100% to cover all the waste costs a little bit skewed, and therefore we recommend for the 17-18 year we continue with the 80% funded through the targeted levy and 20% through the targeted rate, and again revisit that the issue of funding for the activity during the LTP next calendar year. But also we make a recommendation that this council agrees to remove the option for people in the serviced areas to opt out. There will be about 600 properties at the moment who don't pay the targeted levy, and we would like that option to be removed in the 17-18 year, so people can contribute a fair share of the cost of the service. And also the fourth recommendation is to charge for vacant urban land a partial amount to recognize the amenity value, amenity improvement that the service provides to them. And recommendation 5 is to charge a double rate for the larger capacity, for the CBD businesses who receive a larger capacity refuse wheelie bin. Again, Tim is here, and Tim has been going through all the consultation with the rural communities, and he's in a position to respond to any questions you may have with regards to the outcome of those consultations. Thank you.
Thank you, Stavros, and I agree it has been a massive consultation job, and I'm sure that the discussion, if we follow the recommendation with the rural communities, will need to start way before early next year. So I have Councillor Gould with a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is number 4. Urban land. What do you class urban land around the Rotorua area? Because I know rural land is out in the countryside with the farming sector. And how much of the rural land do you go? Do you go past Central Road, or you do go past Brunswick area, or what's your urban area of the Rotorua city?
So we'll be looking to have the Rotorua Lakes catchment as the rural area. So it'd be the area around Rotorua where we'll be expecting development in the near future.
Councillor Stewart.
I'm happy with number 1 because that sends a clear message to the whole community that we've listened to those particular areas, and thank you for that recommendation, Stavros. It's the next one that concerns me the most. The reason why we've had an 80-20 split in the past was the main producers of rubbish are the higher valued properties, i.e. the manufactured goods, the McDonald's, those types of people. And that 20% was a recognition that the Wombles were paid out of that, the residential shopping areas were paid out of that 20% general rate, and also the indiscriminate dumping around the area. So if we go to the 100% waste management targeted rate, who's going to pay for all those other services? Will that be loaded into the general waste management targeted rate?
Yeah, the idea is that the waste activity generates a number of operations that incur costs, and the targeted levy should cover all the costs of the activity. Again, as I said, obviously that's going to be subject to the LTP consideration. The recommendation is not to implement it for 17-18, but to be debated during the LTP process, starting next financial year.
So, Chairman, a similar argument could be levelled at dogs.
So we're just doing questions at this stage, but we'll hear your...
Well, it's the 80-20 split that I'm supporting, that we retain that at the moment, but I'll certainly be strongly debating to retain that into the future, because there is a private good and a public good for certain services that we provide. And based on the general rate means that those that exacerbate the waste stream more, they pay a little bit more than the average householder. Same with dogs, because it's for the common good. Number 3, totally support that. It should never have been allowed to go in the first place.
We're just doing questions at this stage. Have you got a question on number 3?
No, okay.
Councillor Kent, you had a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is number 3, removing the option for those in the serviced area to opt out. Are they able to opt out of both the targeted and the general rate component, or just one? 1 currently?
Currently, they are opting out of the targeted levy.
So we are, once we've got to the end of questions, we are open for discussion. Councillor Hunt, you had a question?
I wanted to discuss, are we open for discussion now? I'm happy to
If there are no further questions, then I'll call for a mover and a seconder.
I'd like to move, and I'm actually really pleased with this conversation because it shows that when we do actually go out to consult with our community, we listen to the feedback. We've heard that they don't want, the rural community aren't ready, and we are going to be creating through our staff a bit more of a bespoke service for them, because they're quite distinct communities and they have quite distinct needs. And I think that while we did our best effort to get something by putting in some collection points along the way, it obviously hasn't met their needs, and we're smart enough to recognise that. I also think number two, I'm pleased we're still at the 80-20 for this year. It will be debated next year. I know the options before us were a 90-10 split, and that was lost around the table. And I think that, yes, we'll have that further discussion next year, and we'll have further information, and ideally we'll have a rural scheme that suits those. I completely support the removing the opt-out. It's an urban, we're all paying to have that availability, and to just decide that it's not, you want to duck it and then drop your rubbish off somewhere else, I think is not fair on everyone else who's paying it. The partial charge I support also, and if you've got twice the bin, well, it seems reasonable. So I fully support this, but I particularly want to congratulate staff on hearing what the community has said, and the willingness to work. And yes, the work, I'm sure, will be starting straight away. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt, for moving, and Councillor Gould for seconding. Councillor Kent's hand was up a nanosecond after yours, and I think he still has a question, so I'll just check before we have any further discussion. Any further questions, Councillor Kent?
It's not actually a question. I have an issue as to whether we should actually be moving all of these at the same time, because whilst I wholeheartedly support 1, I am right behind the first part of 2. I do not agree with 3 or 4.
So I'm happy to take them the vote one at a time, and I'll do that. Are there any other questions, Councillor? Okay. So I shall move them one at a time, and then we can discuss them one at a time. We've heard what Councillor Hunt has to, and I gather you're happy to move all second or 5, Councillor Gould. So the first point being that Council agree to not extend the refuse and recycling service to currently unserviced areas during the 2017-18 financial year, and will continue to work with individual communities towards finding agreeable options for the extension of service. This will be reported back during the Council's 2018-2028 long-term plan process. Is there any further discussion on that one, Councillor Gould?
I'm in favour of this. I realise that all the communities out there, they can't have total agreement, but we've got to go with majority. But at least we're going back out to the community and talking to them and saying, this is the problem we've got, what is the answer, and each community has got a different answer for our questions. So it's good that we're going back out to the rural community.
Thank you, Stavros. I had a question just on this point, and we heard from some communities that there was pretty strong support, and I'm talking about Waimangu Road, Rurifakaitu area. So in the future, is it possible that we can service areas in chunks rather than the whole rural area? Would that be the way we're thinking of approaching this?
The way you understand the feedback we had from the community is that, those communities wanted some unique to themselves, tailored, services. We have explained to them, I think, to the best of our ability, the fact that, the economies of scale need to be taken into consideration too. For example, if you can take a truck, in a particular area that's got an X capacity and it's only using 1/10 of this capacity, these are aborted costs they'll need to take into consideration. If they're willing to pay these extra costs, that's fine. However, whether we can achieve synergies of scale by attaching a particular collection area to an existing area and maximizing the efficiencies of scale, then we are open to do so. The other thing we need to be doing between now and probably November, December this year is need to settle into a package of solutions, because the service provider has to order specially designed vehicles for that area. So I imagine it's going to be a busy period of time to find all the appropriate solutions for that. But also, as I said, we heard the message that some areas for high quality of service and where the efficiencies of scale don't support it, they may be prepared to pay high targeted levy for their particular area. So we are open to discuss it.
Thank you. Any further discussion on point 1 before I put it to the vote? So all those in favour? Against? Carried. So now we move on to point 2, moved again by Councillor Hunt, seconded Councillor Gould, that Council retain the status quo by funding waste services through a ratio of 80% from the targeted rate and 20% from the general rate, with the objective to move all required funding through the waste management targeted rate, i.e. 100%, from the 2018-29 financial year. Councillor Stewart.
Chairman, I'm supportive of this motion because I think this is a work in progress. Stavros, in answer to a question on number 1, said a package of solutions are going to be created for the rural sector, which I totally support. Economies of scale have to be put into place, but there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of the waste stream. Last night I went out driving again and found 2 more dumping sites. The cost of a trailer to the landfill is $39, which people cannot afford, and they're dumping. That's why they're dumping. So there's a package of solutions, not only in terms of picking up recycled waste, the waste stream, and the debate on number 2 will be pretty intense because of the issues that I'm seeing out there that are happening every night because people simply can't afford to go to the landfill. And that's something we've got to live with. We can't change it until next year, but I'll certainly be putting options in front of council that we need a comprehensive reaction to the whole waste stream, just not one particular area. I do say though, Stavros, I'm getting absolutely, and through you, Mr. Chairman, absolutely fantastic support for what we're doing. In terms of, we're getting a couple of complaints because people's bins haven't been collected, but because they've been over full, and they flip onto the road if they're over full, and that's fair enough. But generally, 100% support in terms of the access with those bins. And one of the other, if I just may, in finishing, Mr. Chairman, just say to Stavros, what really disheartens me is the stuff that I'm seeing dumped. Nearly 85% of it is recyclable. And that's why I raised the issue under the 100%, Mr. Chairman, because who pays the 200,000 odd every year for the indiscriminate dumping costs, which are outside the contract of the recycling people? So those are some of the issues I think that have to be addressed in the future. I look forward to finding out where these rural areas are in terms of working with them, because you drive through Gordonton on your way to Auckland, and every rural property has the bins out the front of them. Every one of them. There's no exceptions, and they're quite remote. Some of those communities on the way to Taupiri. So I look forward to that discussion as well. But I just say congratulations, guys. It hasn't been easy. I know you've had a lot of complaints and a lot of trouble with the contractor. You're on top of it, and please keep up the great work. So thank you.
Councillor Kent, you wish to...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The first part of this I'm quite happy with because I support it retaining the 80-20. The second part I have an issue with, and the issue is I don't believe that we should be moving to 100% targeted rate, and I don't believe that we even said we were going to. So why are we now saying that we're doing it with an objective to do so? That wasn't what we agreed in the workshops.
It was part of the proposition in the discussion document, is my understanding. Any other speakers on this one before I put item 2, moved Councillor Hunt, seconded Councillor Gould, to the vote? All right, I'll put it. All those in favour? Against? Carried. So we should vote recorded against. Thank you. Item 3 is that Council remove the option for those in the serviced area to opt out. If you have a property in the serviceable area, you will have to pay. Unfortunately, it's been... Is there anyone that wishes to speak to that point? It's been moved and seconded. Councillor Gould, then followed by Councillor Kent.
I'm in favour of this, Mr Chairman, for the simple reason that if people opt out, it means other ratepayers are going to pay for their services, which means that it's a little bit unfair that some people pay, some people don't. So we've got to get everybody to pay if a particular area want the waste management proposed.
Councillor Kent, you wish to speak to this?
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Again, I have an issue with this one. The issue is we are providing a service to people which we are charging for. If they're not getting that service, then we shouldn't be charging them. It's as simple as that. To actually implement charges when they are not receiving the service is totally against the Local Government Act. Currently, they have the ability to opt out of paying the targeted rate and pay for the service elsewhere themselves. And a lot of people are doing that very, very successfully. It is not a cost to this council at all. So I, for one, do not support this whatsoever.
Thank you. I'll have my say here, if I may. I do fully support this one. My understanding is that there are a number of landlords who have opted out, and I suspect, and it's not confirmed, but a lot of the recyclables that Councillor Sturt is talking about being fly-tipped around the district come from rental properties who don't have the waste service provided because their landlord has opted out, and they don't have the means or financial resources to go to the landfill. So that's my view. Councillor Sturt, do you wish to speak to this?
I really support you, Mr Chairman. I had a case in Clouston Crescent where a tenant didn't have any bins whatsoever. Prior to that, she paid for waste management to deliver. Her rubbish ended up in Rotorua Road, on the side of the road, after she left her rental. So you're quite right. However, I don't think that's the whole issue. The whole issue is they are using the service, because if they've got a flat behind them, what they're doing is putting their rubbish in other people's bins. Yeah. And I've seen it. And the other thing that's really grating me at the moment is the proliferation of black plastic bags going into the general rubbish. Those things are abhorrent in terms of the landfill. So what people are doing is inside their house, they're not having the bin, they're leaving them outside, putting everything in a black polythene bin and then putting that inside our bin, and the ability for that to break down is almost zero. So the issue is, particularly with flats, blocks of 10 flats not having a bin is unbelievably ridiculous. So that's why I support. They should not have the option of opting out, particularly where there's more than one property on that property, or dwelling on that property.
Just before I indulge you, Councillor Kent, is there anyone else that wishes to speak to this item? Councillor Kent, I'll give you another shot at it.
Thank you, because it comes back to the issue that both you and Councillor Sturt have raised. You're looking at it from the point of view of landlords that are running away from their responsibility to provide facilities. I don't believe that this is the way to fix that problem, but this is also penalising those who are providing very good rubbish collection services, all your motels, hotels, apartment blocks that are doing central collection, those that don't have the space to have 50 bins parked outside their individual units and so on. This is too blanket. There are ways to actually prevent landlords from not providing services or not paying for the services, but this is not the way to do it.
Stavros, I'll ask you because the moteliers did speak about this. Are we able to tailor a solution for them?
I consider there are a number of multi-dwelling facilities, that they pay a number of rate lines, and as Councillor Kuhn suggested, that it's not always practical to have 50 sets of bins in a location, but the contractors have and continue to negotiate with them alternative arrangements where we trade off wheelie bins with skip bins, for the sake with no extra cost, instead of paying an X amount of dollars to, or rates to get 20 cents of bins, the same amount of money you get, fewer larger skip bins, for them to be collected at no extra cost for that. One thing I wanted to say though is with regards to the opt-out scheme is that you need to remember that as a council have decided that we are offering a community waste management service, and we have negotiated contracts on the basis of efficiencies of scale. So if you receive a waste collection service through a wheelie bin at 240 litres, it's roughly about $400 a year. We're offering to the ratepayers a capacity almost double that, 420 litres at half that price. And the point is that if we have people opting out of the service, it will dilute the scale efficiency eventually, and we either want to be in the scheme to provide the service or not. If we can't be in the service, then we need the efficiencies of scale to provide the most cost-effective service to the ratepayers.
Thank you for that clarification. Are there any other speakers to this point? Okay, so I'll put the recommendation. Moved, Councillor Hunt, seconded, Councillor Gould, that we remove the option for those in the serviced area to opt out. If you have a property in the serviceable area, you will have to pay. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. So we move on to point 4. Again, already moved and seconded, that we charge the vacant urban land a partial amount. Councillor Stewart.
Why have you not got vacant rural land? Is it because we haven't made arrangements? Because it could be people who have subdivided off a 1 acre block in a fairly concentrated area like Rotorua, Ngākuru, Waikiri, Mamaku, etc. And
I think you're correct. It is only, we're only dealing with the annual plan for this financial year. We haven't made a decision for the rural area as yet, and there are a number of submissions on that.
Next year.
Yep.
Okay.
Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What's the partial amount?
So an availability charge of 50%.
Of the cost.
Just as you pay availability charge for water and wastewater on vacant land, am I right?
Yep. Same principle.
Okay, there are no other speakers. I'll move point 4, that Council resolves to charge vacant urban land a partial amount. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. And point 5, that there is a charge of a double rate for larger capacity bins provided in the CBD. Any discussion? Councillor Gould.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do we need to put down a size of a larger capacity bin? Because sometimes you get different size larger capacity bins.
Would rather not, because those businesses who participate in the service, they know what larger capacity bins are, and those businesses who may come, in the future, we'll have this conversation with them. Not all businesses are the same. In some instances, as I said to Councillor Kent earlier, we negotiate some special arrangements for them, and therefore, this is to differentiate that the residential service provision is different from the business service provision, and allow us some flexibility to have a discussion with the individual businesses to accommodate their particular needs.
Would the trucks be able to pick up these larger bins, or do you have to get special trucks to collect the larger bins?
Well, if there are skip bins, there are, special collection trucks. If there are 360 litre bins, which is, 30% high, more than 240, can be collected by the same vehicle that does the 240 liters. It's okay. The fleet, the contractor's got a fleet that covers both skip bins, 140, 240, 360, and larger bins.
City area, if the bin's too heavy, sometimes the contractor doesn't pick them up, or if the bin is overflowing, would that apply for those?
They are obviously each bin, yes, the answer is that, the recipient of the service has got, rights and also got obligations. I would expect them to comply, with weight restrictions, the type of material restrictions, to make the service, equitable to everyone.
Councillor Sturt.
Stavros, how far are we going to take this? Because at the back of our business, we've got a restaurant with that burnt down, so they're not recycling at the moment. We've got an Indian takeaway, a radio station, a union office, and our office. At the moment, everything goes into a waste management bin. There's no recycling. It just gets dumped and it goes off to landfill. And they pay commiserate. So what Councillor Gould was talking about in terms of, like, I walk past some bins on the ground floor, it says do not put household rubbish in, and they got the big green ones. If they were colour-coded on the lids, for a block like that, that would certainly be a way more efficient way of managing those the waste stream from those particular. And most of the shops in the CBD have alleyways, which Mr. Dine over the last 30 years has made sure have occurred, and so they should have. So here's an opportunity for, like, whilst you're talking to the rural people about their needs, of being a bit more focused on increasing the waste stream going to recycling rather than it all going to the landfill, which it is in our case. Waste management pick it up every week. It's got everything in it.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Councillor Stewart. Just again to remind ourselves, remember that we only started the collection service in November last year. We tried to focus attention into providing the core service to make sure iron out all the teething and and creases we had in the system. However, you would be aware through the O&M reports that in March and April we've done an analysis of the general waste, and we are far from happy about the amount of recyclable materials ending up in the waste bins yet. So we are working with the contractor to provide to develop a whole range of options for that. Our contractor will start very soon getting into direct competition with waste management and other services in that in the skip in a commercial area. But also you'll find into our waste strategy that you have considered and adopted in December last year as a whole range of streams of activities yet to come. And one of these actually rationalization, modification of the service provision, consolidation of services, and all inorganic, green waste, all these sort of things are part and parcel over the next few years. Our processes need to be considered.
Mr. Chairman, through you. Stavros, in terms of public places, at the moment, and I'm not complaining, they've got fabulous bins with red lids on, with the restrictors on, so people can't put a whole lot of green waste or their household rubbish in it, which is fantastic. Why haven't we put a red lid on one and a yellow lid on the other? Because what's happening, particularly I went down to the Kurau market on the weekend, everything just goes in one bin. So is somebody actually going through all that and taking out the recycled stuff?
So currently, if it goes into red bin, it goes straight into the landfill itself. So what we are looking to do over the next 2 years is to increase the amount of recycling in our reserves, public places, and also develop such as the Thursday night market, the Sunday farmers market as well. So look at a range of options to try whether we look at the markets, whether we play around with food waste collection from there and where we go with that, to recycling as well. So we'll be aiming to roll out more recycling into our reserves and other public places very soon.
Thank you. So I'd like to put item 5, it's been moved and seconded, that it charge a double rate for the larger capacity bins in the CBD. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you, councillors. That's the end of conversation 2. We'll move on to conversation 3, the Performing Arts Centre, and welcome Jean-Paul to overview the item. Page 94 of your agenda.
Good morning, councillors. Just, I suppose this one's one of those projects that has been talked about for some time. Now, if you recall, we put together a business case for the redevelopment of the Sir Howard Morrison Performing Arts Centre, and in particularly its concert chamber, just over 3 years ago. At that time, the decision you made, councillors, was that it would be tagged to meeting or gaining match funding. And so that's really what happened at that point, is that the business case went forward, external funding was sought and was not achieved, so therefore the project went on the back burner. Now, that's not to say that some small changes that had been identified within the business case and weren't picked up. So some of those have been undertaken, and there has been work, particularly with the theatre groups, about improving access. However, councillors, what you've got in front of you now is probably a case of restarting that conversation about this project and really just picking up on the key facets of it again, which is, as a performing arts centre, it isn't really geared to be a performing arts centre. You know, over those decades when it was sort of altered to become a convention centre, the concert chamber in particular saw its usage decline to a level which was almost zero. So, and also as a performing arts centre, it only sort of could pick up the shows which had a sort of a likely audience of upwards of 400, so that the main concert chamber, or main civic centre or civic theatre could be used. So what was missing for Rotorua was a sort of a medium-sized 150 to 250 more intimate show area, which had been the original area of that concert chamber. So really the view of this was to start saying, well, we've got an opportunity now with a look at improving its earthquake strengthening rating, which of course you always take the lowest part of the building as the basis of that rating, and that has been the concert chamber. So really this was a chance to restart that conversation with a view of saying, look, we've got a facility that's not fitting into its focus, which is a performing arts venue. It's missing the smaller shows and the potential of smaller shows for the district, and as a consequence it's sort of missing our focus around 2030, some of our priorities in that space. What's been important from the feedback, councillors, is almost that split view then that you started seeing through from submitters. About a third saying, yes, we understand if you're going to earthquake strengthen it, you should look at its overall facility and its value. But others just saying, no, we can't afford that at the moment, so just do the strengthening. So there's a risk if we take that approach, councillors, and the fact that it will cost us more to come back and improve the facility at a later date. Or, as I would crudely put it, we're strengthening an empty room. So that's the sort of the space we have at the moment. So that's the sort of the point that's really come through from that. And then another group was saying about defer it, there's other priorities. So councillors, what we've done here is sort of look at that feedback, and also the fact that we didn't probably project or reset the case and the value proposition we have for this facility well enough to suggest that we should, at this stage, reduce the funding level down to a level that would enable us to do some of the detailed design work, but really premise that on a case of looking at what are we going to achieve out of this facility, what's its value proposition, and probably that's key to that is some of that feedback around how do we get other users into the facility, particularly those community groups who have identified cost as a major barrier. So really from an operational perspective, there's quite a bit of work there to be done to justify the capital investment into this project. So that's really what's being proposed from this change in the recommendation. So councillors, you can see there on those pages 94 to 96, we've just tried to look at that, and as I say, it's that value proposition about how is it going to operate as a business once this work is done. How does that support Vision 2030, but equally how does it make sure that we have a performing arts centre that not only is valuable for bringing external shows, but also for growing and enabling our local community to use it and make it the thriving facility it should be. So that's where we've got to with the preferred recommendation, councillors. Happy to answer any questions.
So we'll just take questions for a start. I'll ask the first one, JP. Could you remind us, please, what is the historic status of the building and also the earthquake rating and timeframes to address that?
Through Mr. Chair, the historic rating actually goes back to the old internal style. So that's when the alterations were originally done to the extension of the entrance and foyer. The two wings were the historic features. So the concert chamber, as it sits, as you go through the entrance and you look at the sort of the walkway that still exists, and that whole facade of the external on the right hand side is the key piece we're talking about, which was historic rating. As far as its earthquake strengthening percentage, Mr. Chair, I might just throw that over to Thomas just to talk briefly about it, what its rating is and what it does for the building, and obviously then its timing implications for strengthening.
Thank you, JP. We did undertake a detailed seismic assessment recently. So overall, the building sits at about 34%, which we're reconfirming. The reason why it sits at 34% is that the actual concert chamber is the weakest part, which is at about 34%, which brings back down the overall rest of the building, which I understand if you look at the individual components, sits anywhere from 50 to 60 to 70%, but because they're all connected, it's put at its weakest section. So we talked previously in the past of strengthening the concert chamber, and doing that alone would obviously lift the overall rating of the whole building.
Thank you, Thomas. Councillor Kent, followed by Councillor Gould.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understand that the earthquake strengthening rules and requirements are being changed later this year. Am I correct in that? And if so, why are we remotely considering going ahead prior to finding out what the changes are going to be?
I think, Councillor, what you're referring to is the time frame required to fix the buildings, not the actual percentage itself. And ultimately what it comes down to as a decision for us is that are you comfortable having the community and the level of risk in a building which is sitting at 34%, or do you wish it to be higher? And if so, what is that higher? And that's part of the discussion that will form this piece of work as well.
So are you saying that the only changes coming during the course of this year are to the time frame within which buildings have to be fixed, or are there other changes pending as well, which I understand?
So, sorry, Councillor, as I said, my understanding is just the time frame. If you're aware of something that we're not, please share it with us, or we'll look into what that is. And yeah.
Councillor Gould.
Mr. Chairman, am I right in thinking, I need clarification, am I right in thinking that the Capital Works program of 39.6 million has been approved? Because part of that is 3,062,000 for the earthquake strengthening of this particular centre.
No, Councillor, obviously any decision on this would have an impact on that figure with regards to the 39 million. So.
Councillor Tapsell.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, just clarifying again, one of the issues that we had with identifying this project was that 6.5 million was spread over the 2 years. So what has been proposed here is to reduce what was included within this coming financial year. So in line with Councillor Gould's question, that would reduce our capital expenditure program for this coming year by approximately 2 million.
Thank you for that, JP. Councillor Tapsell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And JP, I was just wanting to clarify something on page 96 under the preferred option of setting aside $1 million in the 17-18 year. So you're saying further develop a value proposition now and then put aside $1 million. Just to clarify, because it's not quite clear, it's not quite clearly reflected in what we've got there.
Through Mr. Chair, I think that's a very good question, and I suppose what we're saying here is that we would include $1 million within the budget for this coming financial year. So the decision then would be, as you receive that value case and value proposition, you would make a decision to say, yes, we accept that, please proceed to detailed design and go to tender, which would be where we would incur the majority of the expenditure of that $1 million is in that detailed design phase. So then we're in effect committing to the project, but we wanted to make sure that we had a sum included within this year's capital expenditure program to do that, to undertake that. So if the decision is not to proceed, then of course we wouldn't be spending $1 million that's been included within the budget.
Thank you, JP. Councillor Rotorua Tate, followed by Councillor Sturt.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. JP, we tend to, when we look at the performing arts, or we tend to think of the two particular theatre groups in the city who've had the numbers over the years, and I suspect the clout as well. But have we sufficiently identified who some of these new people will be? Because I support this, I support the work that needs to be done, but I want to make sure that we actually do scope and get the people who've wanted to go somewhere to be part of a performing hub. But have we done enough to know who they are so that they know that they will be included in the new arrangement?
Councillor, I think you're absolutely right. When we did this first business case 3 years ago, it did have a focus on where are we up to with the two theatre groups, and probably missed a lot of the other partners who should have been included at that time. And I think the key is that we've identified within that resolution there, commit to development of value proposition in conjunction with key stakeholders. We just wanted to be really clear that actually we need to restart the steering group that was involved in the first round, potentially with quite a different composition, but with the aim of making sure that that work is undertaken. So with the new sort of arts and culture focus that's coming through on the organisation, there's certainly some staff who can pick this up and move that value proposition process forward well.
Thank you, JP. And are you indicating you would move this, Councillor Rotorua Tate? Yeah, thank you. Still on questions though, Councillor Sturt. Seconder, Councillor.
I just think the recommendation needs a bit of a tidy up. I mean, I want to put a finite figure there that council commit development of the value proposition to the value of $6.5 million in conjunction with key stakeholders, and bring back to council for final approval to proceed. Cut out from council because you've already got that. Approval to proceed with the Performing Arts Centre Enhancement and Upgrade Project. So what we're asking is that we commit to 6.5 million in conjunction with key stakeholders and bring it back to council for final approval. I will support this. I think this delay of 3 years has cost us nearly $2 million. This should have gone ahead before. Unfortunately, you're right, JP, we focused on just the two theatre groups who are minor players now in terms of using this facility. There are many other stakeholders and user groups that could have this. So I hear some of the submitters in terms of and letters to the editor just recently that we have got work to do at the Aquatic Centre. That's a given. We're working on that, so I don't see that as a block to the Performing Arts Centre development proposal going ahead. So, Mr. Chairman, I will be supporting the motion, providing it's amended to reflect what I've just said.
Yeah, Councillor Sturt, I'll just ask the Chief Executive to respond to your suggestion.
So, through the Chair, I think the inclusion of the value case is really giving you the opportunity to do two things. One is to actually look at a determination of what value do you see as being created around the refurbishment of this facility. Secondly, it could be more, it could be less. That's precisely the point.
Councillor Kent, you had another question?
I'm not happy with the project as it's been put forward, and if you actually read some of the submissions, there's one particularly good one which actually points out numerous deficiencies with it that I think should be investigated very fully. I would like to suggest that we actually change the what is being proposed there, A, to include a maximum figure in this current financial year, and I'm quite happy that that be set at 1 million. But I would like to think that we change it to proceed with a performing arts centre enhancement and upgrade project, not the one, because I'm not happy with the current one at all, and neither are most of the submitters.
So the mover and the seconder happy, because we are talking clearly about the Sir Howard Morrison Performing Arts Centre building. Mover and seconder happy with that, or otherwise I'd call on...
No, I'd like, Mr Chairman, as the mover, I'd like it to remain as the Performing Arts Centre. That's what we've done all of our work on, that's what we've been looking forward to in the last few years. So that's the one that I certainly would like to move and remain as is.
So you're happy with the motion as it stands? So I'll call questions, and Councillor Hunt, one question. So before we speak to it, I'll call questions to a close. We'll start with discussion, and you've got the first shot, Councillor Hunt.
I'm really pleased with where this has landed. I think that particularly engaging with those people who might use it, other than the two groups who are obviously much more prominent in our community, there are many groups that price has been a barrier, so we're not even aware of them. So actually working with who would use it if they could afford to use it might indeed flush out a whole lot of people in the community. And then we're likely to build a facility that actually reflects their needs as well. And so the reinstatement of that steering group, it will be great because it'll wake up those people in the community, and there are a lot of younger people moving in whose idea of performing arts far exceeds the narrow band that many people consider in our community. So performing arts is a growing field, and I would like I think that the actual facility needs also to reflect some of the submissions that came through, because there were some glaring omissions from those who were familiar with using that sort of space. And that's great, because we'll get a value proposition, we'll come back with a plan that group who know what they're talking about can chew over, and we'll also flush out those younger people and older people in our community who haven't been engaged at this point because they didn't feel either included or they didn't belong to some of those clubs. And so this is great. We'll get to talk about it. My understanding is in the long-term plan we've got that funding already allocated in future years for this development. And again, we'll be coming up to long-term plan decision making, so we can decide when and how that gets built depending on what stage we get at. So this is great. Knowing it's going to be round about $1 million to get to that point, it's not going to cost that for us to make a decision, but we know that once we've made that decision, that's going to be the upfront cost to get it to kick-off stage. So I fully support it.
Councillor Gould, followed by Councillor Maxwell.
Point of clarification, when you got to council for final approval, are you talking about going to a workshop committee level, then full council, or were you just talking about going straight to full council with the approval?
It would come through SPNF, is my understanding. Am I correct, JP?
Yes, Mr Chair, and probably depending on, and we're speculating here, I would suggest that we probably need to have a workshop leading into an SPNF discussion to recommend to council.
Did you want to speak further to the matter, Councillor Gould?
In favour of the motion anyway, Mr Chairman. I think it's great that we're going back out to the community again and getting their total support this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Maxwell, followed by Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. No, I'm very pleased with this motion and strongly support it. Not only many of the submitters wanted the earthquake strengthening done, and by us doing that, it enhances the whole building, as I heard from Thomas earlier. That's one. The other one is, as somebody who performed in that arena winner was a tiered seating type. That shows how young I was, in my teenagers. And many of the Maori concerts or shows were done in that venue before it went to hotels and to maraes and various things. And so I think there's going to be a need for a venue like this, a tiered seated venue, because many of the maraes, now the tourism numbers are climbing, which is great, and the use, I think, will develop even further, but not only for Maori groups, other performing arts groups. So I think this is a good motion to get us forward, and being part of organisations that in the past when we did try funding organisations, I think that they would come on board. I know this will just enhance the community's appreciation of the performing arts. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Maxwell. Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm comfortable that we've taken a fallback position to further development and look at the whole thing properly. That I can go along with. I would also like to just point out to everyone the impact of that decision. We were looking at a $3 million expenditure in this current financial year, which wasn't effectively in the long-term plan originally. That $3 million is over 3% of our rate increase this year. To fall back to a $1 million expenditure by saving $2 million on this project, we are now in a position to be able to go out with a rate increase in this current financial year within the rate of inflation and still proceed with everything else that we wish to in the plan. On that basis, I support the motion.
So, thank you, Councillor Kent. 4 speakers in support. Is there anyone against, or I'll put the motion? Okay, I shall put the motion that Council agree to commit further development of the value proposition in conjunction with key stakeholders and bring back to Council for final approval to proceed with the Performing Arts Centre enhancement and upgrade project. It's been moved, Councillor Rotorua Tate, seconded Councillor Maxwell. All in favour? Against? Carried. Yes, Councillor Stern. Mover and seconder happy with that? Yep. Okay. Yep. Okay. Thank you, councillors. Now I'm advised that lunch is ready, so we'll take an early adjournment for lunch just before we go. Yep. So Councillor Kent has just made an assumption as to the indicative rates rise due to this decision. Can I ask Thomas to comment on that?
That statement was incorrect. I think the impact of this decision is that it reduces the level of capital spend, which then reduces the level of borrowing for this year. And so their debt will reduce, that we were planning on borrowing. The impact on the rates, though, is subject to a whole other number of other variable factors. Yep.
And we'll find out what those are later on, I guess. We'll break for lunch. Thank you. Yeah, so we'll come back at 12:30.